Hi there, my name is Goose, and I make silly videos in the form of shitty PowerPoints talking about things that I am in no way qualified to talk about whatsoever, and spouting nonsensical schizoid conspiracy theories about anything and everything that's ever existed. Today, we're going to be talking about the Titanic, which in retrospect is a bit darker than my last episode, which, if you didn't see it, was basically a bunch of autistic nonsense about dinosaurs being mammals, which, if that interests you, congratulations, you're one of us now. I get the brain cell on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, and you get it on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but Sunday is the Sabbath, so thinking is forbidden. First things first, we're going to have to establish some basic history of the Titanic, which shouldn't be that hard considering it's the most well known shipwreck on the planet and Leonardo DiCaprio was in a movie about it. So, if you want the version of history that was written by the lizard overlords that live under the Denver International Airport, then just go watch that and stop wasting your time here. Where was I? The Titanic was a big ass metal boat, which sounds like a dumb idea, but we used a bunch of those to kick the Japanese and the Germans' asses in the 1940s, so maybe metal wasn't the problem. Anyway, it was fucking huge, especially for the time. It was 882 feet and 9 inches long, so bigger than you, 92 foot 6 inches wide, and 175 feet tall. Its construction began in 1909 and was completed in 1912 on April 2nd. What made this ship so special is that in 1912 it was the largest ship ever constructed, and its stout design and thick metal hull contributed to the propaganda conveniently released by White Star Line, the company who owned it, that the ship was unsinkable. Strangely, a fishy smell is in the air immediately about the Titanic specifically because a sister ship, the RMS Olympic, was constructed alongside the RMS Titanic to sail along with her as a new class of ocean liner, the Olympic class, of which the Titanic was a member. However, the irony and suspicious fuckery begins before the launch of the ships, as the one ship that did sink was immediately touted as being unsinkable. Yeah, come on board. We promise we won't sink. Anyway, to get the story out of the way so that we can start throwing around wild accusations against people who died a long time ago, we're just going to blast right through this. The Titanic began her maiden voyage on Wednesday, April 10th, 1912, from Southampton, England, and was headed ultimately for New York. After a few stops in the UK and France, but she never made it. On April 14th, somewhere in the Atlantic, the ship struck an iceberg and sank, taking a homeless Leonardo DiCaprio with it. The official narrative is this. At 11:40 p.m. ship's time on April 14th, lookout Frederick Fleet spotted an iceberg immediately ahead of Titanic and alerted the bridge. First Officer William Murdoch ordered the ship to be steered around the iceberg and the engines to be reversed, but it was too late. The starboard side of Titanic struck the iceberg, creating a series of holes below the waterline. The hull was not punctured, but rather dented such that the steel plates of the hull buckled and separated, allowing water to rush in. 5 of the 16 watertight compartments were heavily breached, and a sixth was slightly compromised. It soon became clear that Titanic would sink, as the ship could not remain afloat with more than 4 compartments flooded. Titanic began sinking bow first, with water spilling from compartment to compartment over the top of each watertight bulkhead as the ship's angle in the water became steeper. That was direct copy-paste from Wikipedia, so at least we know we're accurate to what the lizard people tell us to believe. But if we want to be asking some more interesting questions, then why didn't they see the iceberg sooner? We're going to have to get into some more nuanced history. First off, we're going to start naming names. J.P. Morgan. Who owned the Titanic? Well, White Star Lines owned the Titanic. But White Star Lines was actually just a subsidiary of International Mercantile Marine Company. Who the fuck is that? Well, they're actually a holding company controlled by American financier J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan was an absolute dog in American finance. At the time, his estimated net worth was around $80 million, which in today's money legitimately makes him a billionaire. He was a key player in the creation of a corporation, yes, you heard right, corporation, known as the Federal Reserve. Let's pause on the Titanic for a bit and talk about the general fuckery of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is the central bank of the United States of America, but it's not actually a government entity or agency. It's a private company, which is weird because the Federal Reserve was created by an act of Congress, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. So what the hell is the Federal Reserve? If it's a private company, why was it created by an act of Congress? And if it was created by an act of Congress, why isn't it a government agency? Here we go. Let's get stressed out together, shall we? 1910. Jekyll Island, the state of Georgia, United States of America. In the middle of the night, 6 men meet in secret at the Jekyll Island Club, a private elite 1% rich boy caviar-sucking, golf club swinging corporate crime palace frequented by the fucking Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts, surprise, surprise, to discuss completely overhauling the financial system in the U.S. The 6 men are Nelson Aldrich, A. Piatt Andrew, Henry Davison, Arthur Shelton, Frank Vanderlip, and Paul Warburg, all associates and co-conspirators of, you guessed it, J.P. Morgan. Here's the plan. We're going to have a company. This company is going to be supported by Congress. The law is going to be written to ensure that this company is the only company allowed by the government to print money. The company that prints the money is also going to be a bank. That bank is going to have 15 different branches across the country. Each branch will have a board of directors. The board of directors will be elected by the local banks in the area. Larger banks get more votes. Each branch and board of directors will then be responsible for holding the reserves of the voting local banks, now called member banks. The branches will be responsible for issuing currency, discounting commercial paper, transferring balances between the 15 branches, check clearing, collection. The whole of the reserve will be allowed to set discount rates for everybody else and buy and sell securities, all of which enforced by Congress and law, which prohibits other private entities from doing the same, thus monopolizing the entire banking system. But the public probably won't like that. What if we name it the Federal Reserve? Now, the fact that an act of Congress is the catalyst to its creation follows a narrative of responsible governmental intervention into the financial system. We'll make sure that the newspapers tell everyone how bad things are, we'll create a financial crisis, which J.P. Morgan did in 1907, and then we'll offer a solution and pretend it's government. Then we'll use our power, money, and sway to do the bidding of the demonic secret squirrel society, and we'll all get anime girlfriend body pillows in return. Sound like a deal? After the secret meeting, Frank Vanderlip, one of the 6, traveled to Washington, D.C. to begin drafting an act for Congress. Have meetings, start greasing the wheels, making promises, deals, handshakes, all backdoor. No signatures until the act gets passed. This is going to take a few years. During this time, J.P. Morgan continues to amass his wealth, make moves on the secret plan to start the Federal Reserve, and build a big fucking boat. The RMS Titanic. Okay, so this is getting kind of weird, but where's the secret Big Mac sauce? What does any of this have to do with an iceberg? Hang on, silly goslings, we're almost there. Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, and John Jacob Astor IV. These 3 men died on the RMS Titanic when she sank on April 15, 1912. These 3 men were wealthy business moguls, American business moguls, just like J.P. Morgan, just like Nelson Aldrich, A. Piatt Andrew, Henry Davison, Arthur Shelton, Frank Vanderlip, and Paul Warburg from Jekyll Island. As a matter of fact, there is some anecdotal evidence that they even know each other. Isidor Straus specifically had to know somebody or know something about the plans for the Federal Reserve. In fact, he was reported in papers as supporting the idea of a central banking system, perhaps softening up the public in the few short years leading up to the Federal Reserve Act. But what about the other 2? Well, the theory is that Benjamin Guggenheim and John Jacob Astor IV, as well as hundreds of rich, wealthy businessmen and political swayers on board the RMS Titanic, may have opposed a central banking system for some reason or another. God knows why you wouldn't want a governmentally enforced private monopoly in charge of printing your money. But J.P. Morgan would have wanted to eliminate the troublemakers. He owned the boat. He would meet with rich American colleagues and acquaintances who posed potential threat to the plan and say, hey, I've got this big-ass fancy-dancy boat thing going for a ride to New York coming up. You should come along. We've got champagne and lobster." Lucky for the lobsters, seafood night wasn't scheduled until April 16th, and they just skittered off on the ocean floor after the world's roughest underwater drop tower ride from Cedar Point and lived happily ever after. If someone on that boat was either capable of either posing a threat to the passing of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, or even worse, going public with the information, I can't see a reason that they'd ever get out alive. It's the 1912 equivalent of being friends with the Clintons. But why would J.P. Morgan, who was on the schedule and had his own private suite and free tickets, sink a boat that he was on? Well, he didn't. He never got on the boat. He canceled last minute right before she left port. So did Alfred Vanderbilt, who frequented Jekyll's Island private club. So did George Washington Vanderbilt II, who canceled leaving his luggage on the boat because it had already been delivered. Matter of fact, the list of acquaintances of J.P. Morgan who were booked on the list had tickets and canceled their trip last minute include Milton Hershey of Hershey's Chocolate, John Alden Dix, governor of New York, Frank Sieberling of Goodyear Tire Company, J.C. Penney of J.C. Penney, Horace Harding, a New York financier, and many others. Is it possible that J.P. Morgan knew the ship would go down and quietly urged his friends, or those loyal to the cause, to take a different boat? If so, now we've got more questions. If J.P. Morgan, in league with the Federal Reserve conspirators, elected to sink the ship, wouldn't it financially cripple him? Well, no. The ship cost $7 million to build, but he got $5 million back on the insurance claim, and the $2 million lost honestly aren't that big of a fucking deal when you've got $78 million more in your pockets. And you're about to kick off the Federal Reserve and print as much as you want for you and your buddies so you can go play polo on a $250,000 horse named Good Beans. Okay, well then what about all of his other friends or colleagues that were on the boat? Well, he probably gave them a shot. The loyal ones were warned and canceled last minute like the Vanderbilts, and the rest of them just had to go for a little swim. All right, well, how do you purposely sink a boat by accidentally hitting an iceberg? Well, that's a whole new topic. Let's enter our schizophrenia together, shall we? Deep breaths and count to purple. The sinking. How would it have been arranged? Well, let's look at two theories. Theory 1, the iceberg. The area where the Titanic struck the iceberg was well known by sailors and ship's captains to have icebergs, field ice, and pack ice at that time of year. Honestly, with the route that the Titanic was sailing, she was almost guaranteed to see ice. Would it be so difficult to have paid a large sum of money to a couple of lookouts to say nothing when sailing through? Guarantee them a slot on a lifeboat and just give them some cash. Well, they'd have to survive the sinking for that, Goose. Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee. The lookouts who cried "iceberg ahead" a bit too late both happened to have survived the sinking. Well, what happened to those guys? Frederick Fleet went on to serve in 2 world wars, live his life in guilt, which is genuinely reported by history, and then commit suicide in 1963. Reginald Lee is a little bit more interesting. Lee died allegedly from pneumonia 1 year later in 1913, the same year that the Federal Reserve Act was passed, the same year J.P. Morgan died of mysterious illness, the same year the government established what was supposed to be a temporary income tax, which is fucking bullshit because over 100 years later, I have to get my shit robbed by Uncle Sam every time I want to cash my blue-collar check to buy a fucking box of Kraft mac and cheese for my kid, so fuck whoever came up with that one. 1913, the year that the government installed direct election of senators, thank you so much for that. 1913, the year that the governor of New York, William Sulzer, approved the charter for the Rockefeller Foundation, which kicks off with a fat $100 million donation from Rockefeller himself. I'm gonna lose my fucking mind. Sorry, kind of let my ADHD run a bit with that one. Anyway, the second theory is pretty easy. Somebody blew a big hole in the side of the ship with explosives. But honestly, this one's pretty easily debunked due to all the survivor accounts describing icebergs and hearing a grinding, scraping sound at first impact, so much as I'd like to, I'm not really going to entertain it. Realistically, if the sinking was intentional, it was well organized. and deliberate in its approach. The route was common and well known for ice hazards, and only a couple of things need to actually go wrong for it to work. Warnings from other ships in the area need to somehow not make their way to the Titanic, which happened. Lookouts need to wait on warnings until it's too late, which happened. And nearby vessels need to not help, which happened. The SS Californian, which was only 10 miles away, stopped sailing right about the time the Titanic struck ice and turned off its radio. In the middle of the ocean, stopped sailing and turned off its radio. What the fuck? When questioned, the crew of the Californian claimed they stopped due to ice. When questioned about the signal flares launched off the deck of the Titanic, the crew said that they saw them but thought that they were fireworks. Sailors thought that signal flares were fireworks. In the middle of the ocean, fully aware that the nearest land was hundreds of miles away. What the fuck? Yeah, you can go Kentucky Fried fuck yourself with that one, Captain Dipshit. I don't believe that for a fucking minute. And boats are kind of easy to sink anyways. All you have to do is fill them with water and boom. Now you're a fish tank decoration at the bottom of the ocean. And if you do it in a lake, maybe Gordon Lightfoot will write a song about you. Look, we've covered a lot of deficit and disorder when it comes to my attention on this one, so I'm going to sum it up pretty quickly here. There is a possibility that a cabal of wealthy old world families who created the Federal Reserve and possibly your income taxes sank the Titanic to ensure that their plans for global financial domination remained intact. And they could better serve their ancient evil gods that they worship in Bohemian Grove when they're not attending the Met Gala or a party on a tropical island, eating cheese pizzas and watching midgets try calculus on tall chalkboards. Is any of this true? I don't know. I typically don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, but I did research a bunch of weird conspiratorial historical shit on the internet for a week and make a shitty PowerPoint about it, so I'd believe me if I were you. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been Goose. Keep it silly out there. Don't forget to put salt on your windowsills to keep the sleep paralysis demons away. Peace out.